Those of you who don't yet know Electron, we have been looking at how you create more efficient, inclusive electricity markets for coming up to 3 years now in Electron, and many, many more years in various other guises amongst the team. I think you've heard quite a bit about a number of energy projects over the last 2 days, some really exciting ones around the kind of peer-to-peer or asset tokenization space. So I'm going to open the aperture a bit and talk about something completely different. We are trying to bring big energy into this space. We're working with grid operators, kind of big retail traders, to rationalize market structure and essentially concentrate liquidity and data structure such that everyone can contribute, everyone can play. I think the kind of peer-to-peer use case is a bit more easy to understand, right? Like, I've got solar and a battery and my neighbor doesn't, so I can give them power. And that's all well and good. That's great if you can afford solar and a battery. But if we can kind of bring all of the capacity and capabilities of the energy market into one coordinated data architecture, we can drive down the cost of power and the carbon intensity for everyone. So it's kind of everyone wins. But I do think that blockchain is, well, that was essentially energy is actually the quintessential coordination challenge. We've got this system that, everyone is forced to use this same physical infrastructure, but you've got so many different monopolies and players throughout that space who all have purview of their own kind of tiny region, and no one wants to hand over control to anyone else. So let's look at how we got to these very inefficient market structures. Because in last century's energy systems, we definitely wouldn't be standing here talking about distributed transaction systems. Essentially, we had this very centralized world in which a couple of huge generators exported coal, gas, like kind of very steady, predictable power, down to completely passive end consumers. I guess the analogy here with the media industry is to think of that move from a broadcast system to this kind of interactive marketplace. And the interactive marketplace, started kind of appearing in energy with renewables. As solar and wind started getting installed, kind of halfway down the system. So these guys who are balancing the system at the top, are suddenly seeing all this new generation come on that's essentially invisible to them. And more than that, it's unpredictable. It's not this steady generation pattern. It's weather dependent. It's intermittent. So suddenly you've got kind of grid system operators who are having to take all these extra balancing intervention. And what are we doing? We're relying on coal. We're relying on these like nice kind of predictable diesel farms to turn on and balance our system because we don't know about all the stuff going on here. And that situation's rapidly getting either way worse or way more exciting, depending on which side of this transformation you're on, as all these kind of behind-the-meter assets starting getting installed. You and I can go and put an electric vehicle or a battery system into our house. This stuff behind our meter, completely invisible to everyone up here. All this capacity is capable of responding to grid price signals. Like, they can tell us what they want us to do with it. But that's not happening today because of this kind of lack of coordination. So what we're doing is we're putting all this extra capacity into the system. It's going to be 5x solar, 2.5x wind by 2030. We're not taking very much of the old, dirty stuff out because we still think we need to rely on it to kind of fill in the gaps. So I think only about 10% of global coal is forecast to retire by 2030. Massive overcapacity built up. This system is built for huge, almost like infinite redundancy. We're saying the lights must not go out at any cost. It's not the right answer. I think the right answer is there is a cost at which someone would like to turn the lights off, at which someone would like to shift their generation. So if we can share those price signals with people who own the assets, then we can create cost savings and revenue opportunities for everyone. And it really is everyone. This is one of those amazing moments when this kind of trade-off collapses and you get this kind of win-win situation. So if we can get real-time kind of input-output price signals just for power to people with energy assets, so kind of anything, then the main beneficiaries are the consumers. It's you and us, but it's also all the kind of manufacturers who are using a lot of power and creating goods for us. We're the main beneficiaries. What's cool, though, is the grid operators, the kind of industry savings up here win, too. They are making really inefficient uses of their transformers. They're burning through 50-year asset lives, in half the time. Suddenly, we've got this series of aligned incentives for everyone to come together and co-create a set of price signals and share what they want people to do. But a couple of big problems here on coordination. The first one is this asset visibility piece is held in silos in lots of different places through the grid. In all these different silos, no one essentially wants to hand over or share all the information they can see with any one counterparty, because that's kind of their source of power or their competitive advantage. So we've got these kind of invisible, underutilized assets on the one hand. Then we're missing the markets that would bring those assets in and engage those assets. So the markets used to be just literally the power markets, the kind of big exchange-traded forward markets that you can access if you're a kind of big coal plant. Now we're getting smaller amounts of power, kind of more real time. But it's not just power. This is what's kind of really cool. We're kind of decommoditizing energy. Suddenly the location of your action is valuable. If you're behind a constraint, not very valuable. You have to be bought by someone, in your sort of microgrid area. If you can relieve that constraint, you can basically be paid twice. If you're near someone who wants to use the power, your power's worth more than if it has to travel and experience losses. And there's all these other value layers that are being kind of coming in, like the carbon intensity, the response profile. Those are non-rival value components. So a single asset can provide services to multiple players at the same time. You can help the grid operator balance the system. You can help a local network operator relieve a constraint. And you can provide kind of clean local power to someone nearby you or to an off-taker. But unless everyone's in the same, kind of talking the same language in the same system, you only, you get to pick one of them. You can't do these multilateral trades. So the net result of that inability to coordinate is everyone pays more for this highly redundant, inefficient system. We continue to rely on high carbon production to cover peaks, and we challenge system resilience. So we rely on a couple of big coal plants instead of distributing, or instead of many, many more smaller distributed assets. So we have built a it's sort of part platform, part protocol to look at this. This is the Electron X protocol. On the one hand, the first module of this is a sort of identity module. It just gives a single identity to a single asset, rather like a digital twin. So let's say you are a battery operator. You can and you're licensed to trade with grid operators. You essentially register your asset. Here's the unique identifier. This is what it can do. This is where it is today. And you can associate contracts or capabilities with that asset. On the other hand, we're working with system operators like National Grid, like UK Power Networks and Northern Power Grid, and some of the big traders like EDF and Shell, to define what the services they would want to build from, or want to procure from those assets are. And the assets bidding into this platform can essentially prove that they're capable of providing those services. So say it's a local grid operator, and you're bidding in a locational service. You kind of immediately check that's possible. You don't need to put a lot of this on the blockchain, just a kind of minimum amount to guarantee that everyone is speaking the same language and the same kind of market infrastructure, just to guarantee that coordination. But all you need here is the unique identifier and the association of public assets. You need here the kind of product definition, the umpire contract that dictates how it's matched, and all the other data can be stored off blockchain. You can kind of grant permissions to go and access some of these like already existing data silos in order to prove that trade actually happens. This is kind of a re-coordination of an increasingly fragmenting industry that's shaking apart. And it doesn't need you to go and rebuild the whole system. If today, let's say you're accidentally exporting, as a battery, you're also exporting your response profile, but you're not in the market for a kind of quick, fast response. Suddenly there's a product here that pays you to actually respond to a signal faster. They say, well, look, your power is worth more the faster you respond. That's an attribute you can go and add to this data infrastructure. You don't have to know what all the market structures are today. You just have to get everyone speaking the same language. So these are some of the partners we brought together in September last year. This was a 9-month kind of consortium workshop series. We brought everyone around the table for a couple of hours every month to kind of go through the architecture, define some of these platforms. The technological bit is the kind of solution to the coordination bit, but there's also a huge human element here in this market design we've been tackling. What we learned very, very quickly is regulators and the energy regulators are your friend. I think there's often this kind of feeling in the kind of crypto space that regulators are trying to screw everything up, but these guys really get governance, and they brought us a ton of kind of rules we could automate through the system. We're starting with a permission participation system in order to comply with a bunch of those regulatory rules. The emphasis on data ownership and access is key, and actually launching, so we've now moved this group into launching 4 product trials and kind of like active projects with some of these guys, and they all wanted to really touch it and feel it and just understand how they're not handing over like all of the details of the assets that they've collected to their competitors. And it wasn't really until they were doing it that they really understood it. And the 4th piece here was interesting. We started getting all these incoming calls kind of around about January this year when this was publicly announced from other countries saying, can you come and do similar things here? I think there's a feeling that different energy structures make something kind of impossible to move across, but actually the data infrastructure is identical. So here it is. So this is why blockchain fundamentally has the ability to finally transform and rationalize this energy space. Coordination, long recognized we need to do it in energy, but the trade-off was always the handing over of control of data, customers, and functionality. And that trade-off has suddenly collapsed. So we're seeing a lot of different developed and renewable grids starting to think about moving to this market structure, coming around the table together in a way they've never come around the table before, and tackling these really, really thorny issues of how we get to, let alone 100% renewables, at least 50%, this really needs to move. So, and then what is the business model for this? Well, what we ended up building, we call it a vertical protocol. So in as much as it's not a base protocol, we're building off Ethereum or a fork of it at the moment. It's essentially a series of industry-specific rules that govern how an asset is given an identity, has attributes associated with it, and is coordinated across a bunch of traded markets. It's an energy-specific protocol and series of governance systems. And then the model that we end up building on top is kind of part trading or part exchange platform, part app store. So a number of really cool things about decentralized energy exchanges that you couldn't do on a centralized platform. Suddenly, instead of just having one central credit provider who everyone had to trade with as an intermediary, you can have multiple competing providers and drive down the price of that simple service. You can have multiple competing matching algorithms. So as soon as you're matching multilateral trades, you've got someone purchasing location, someone buying energy, and someone buying carbon intensity, all on one side of a trade. You can start having a couple of guys and girls in their garage kind of creating to write more efficient matching algorithms than some of the grid systems and earning money when their matches are chosen. And all other sorts of data or kind of trading algorithmic services that can be built by everyone. So we're moving away from this energy world when innovation was kind of captive to the big utilities who kind of owned and hoarded the data, to a world in which anyone can play. You can kind of devolve or roll out increasing kind of specific value-added services, and you can start actually finding the inefficiencies in the market and driving towards a kind of cheaper, greener power system for everyone, not just people with batteries. So it's a big 3 months for us. We're going to be announcing 2 more markets. We've already announced the UK that we're rolling into, and 2 more product trials. And we're also going to be announcing a fundraising. So if anyone's interested in hearing more and kind of being involved, please get in touch on the email on the screen. Thanks very much.
All right, Jojo Hubbard. Fantastic.